My name is Wendy Haynes, and I am a full professor now, I'm happy to say, at Bridgewater State University. I just stepped down as coordinator of the MPA program. Difficult thing to do, but necessary. And I was before that, before I became a professor, which I love, it's the best job. I was with the State Inspector General's office for about 13 years, monitoring the Big Dig project. Well, I think my interest began when I was in Washington, D.C., and I just sort of fell into a job on Capitol Hill. And I thought that I knew how government operated, having taken one whole political science class as an undergraduate, and that was while Watergate was breaking. And I was just astonished that someone could get away with the kinds of things that Nixon was getting away with. And so I did a tremendous amount of research for my Republican congressman that I was working for, thinking that perhaps I could persuade him about what was going on. And he, of course, could not respond. And I started thinking, you know, when our public officials, whether they be elected or appointed, go south on us, who's there to guard and look after our families and our communities and our neighbors? And it was really, that was really the birth of my interest, big interest in public service. And so, in retrospect, I can make sense of the things that I did, but I can't say that there was a big, grand scheme. Opportunities, it's amazing. Opportunities seem to present at just the right time, and if you have a sense about what the experience is that you want to have, then those opportunities surface. And if you're smart enough to take advantage of them, you know, there's a great deal that any of us can do, far more than we have the capacity to do in a lifetime, which is what makes it so important to leave a legacy, because we really can't do it all. And so eventually, I had had a dream since I was 7 of getting my doctorate, and I had no idea what that meant. It just sounded so wonderful. And so by the time I was in my, you know, well into my career and living in Boston, I thought, if I don't go now for it, I'm never going to go for it. So I did, and I worked full-time in the IG's office while going to Northeastern, and I got my doctorate, and again fell into this awesome faculty position at Bridgewater. And it was in some respects karmic return, because I had occasion to hire a great number of people, and I always complained about these people. Didn't seem like they could write well and had difficult time with critical thinking, and all of a sudden I was in a position where I could make a difference with that. So that was my trajectory, my change. And it's, I think that public service is a noble profession. And when I hear that expression, good enough for government work, which we hear too often, I think, you know, that's a very high standard to be good enough for government work. So we need to rethink how we regard that, and how much we treasure and honor and respect our public servants. And they in turn, and we in turn, must honor the people that ceded that power over their lives too. And that's, I think, what accountability is about, and that's what makes it so exciting. What I talk with my undergraduate students about is that government is ubiquitous. It affects us in every day, and probably many times a day, and in some cases constantly throughout the day and the night, whether that's a protective service or a social service or taxing or licensing cars, you know, whatever that might be. So you can choose to complain about it, and surely many people do, or you can also make a choice to be engaged in it and to do what you can in your own way to hold those officials and those individuals accountable. But the flip side of accountability is also respect. So I think there's a reciprocal relationship, I think, among government, public service folks and citizens that I think is really important. With my students especially, I think what just makes an awesome day for me is when that light goes off, that they realize that it is possible that they can make a difference in government, in their lives, in the services their families are getting, making that difference. And when they realize they can make a difference, and I realize I have made a difference. When I started working with the Inspector General's office, I found out, I think perhaps a day after I started, that I would be heading up a group of lawyers and engineers and analysts who were charged with monitoring the Big Dig project. Now, at the time when I began, the Big Dig project was estimated to be about $3 billion and to be completed in the late 90s. What actually happened was that it was completed for $15 billion in about 2007. So my students laugh and say, oh, great job monitoring the project. You know, it went from 2.6 to 15. I said, well, it would have been double what it was had we not been there. And I think there's some truth in that. One of the things about these huge projects, and the Big Dig project is a bypass road to get to the airport before you get into Boston, a depressed artery through Boston, and then a river across, or a bridge across the Charles River. And it's so complex, it was so complex, and is still so complex, and so loved in many respects by politicians and the public, and mysterious because of the complexity of the project. So one of the most challenging parts of our job was to try and peel the onion of this project to figure out what was really going on. And one of the things that we ended up concluding was the biggest problem was that the public administrators had ceded much of the power and the responsibility for the job to the private sector without properly crafting the contracts that would govern that relationship between the public agencies and the private sector. And so there was no real incentive built into the contract or the series of contracts to come in on budget and on time. That was one part of it. But the second part of it is that because it was so complicated, they would put designs out to bid before they were completed. And so the folks who were doing the construction had every reason to come in with cost overruns and say, hey, you never told us what you were going to do on this, or we encountered unanticipated conditions. And so one of our jobs was to comment on that, to write reports, to point out some of these difficulties and some of the sort of horrible outcomes that could result from shoddy workmanship. We, at the time, weren't listened to, but we did our job in putting the word out. But it's one of those situations where the project itself is so fascinating that people fell in love with it. And in the process of that admiration and awe, forgot that it was still a project that was being funded with public money, and money that, frankly, our grandkids are going to be paying off. So while the result is lovely, the process and the costs of it were enormous. And so we had the honor and the challenge of beginning to understand that and to get the word out about it.